Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Becoming a Successful Manager Q&A: Strategies for Leadership and Growth, presented by Watermark Learning's Head of Leadership Growth, Dr. J. Pugh. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I will be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the session, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our dedicated Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Dr. J.
Hey, thank you, Mariella, and welcome everybody. I want to make sure everybody gets a moment to make their way in and get comfortable. As Mariella mentioned, I'm Dr. J. Pugh. I'm our head of leadership and development with Educate 360. And so I want to make sure that we have a little bit of room that today has a little bit of different feel. We do different approaches. Some days we do webinars, and the webinars are a little bit more content focused in the way that we drive in. The other ways today is a little bit different. It's really geared about being more of a Q&A. So probably instead of going about 45 minutes of webinar, we're actually going to shorten up the webinar. And the reason why is because I want to hear the questions from you all. I want to know what you're finding, what concerns you're running into, what questions you may have. And that's really ultimately what I want to spend the second half of today doing, is really understanding the pain points you're up against and seeing how we can be able to help. So today it's much more about the audience than solely about the content, but welcome. But what we are going to kick off today is really understanding about setting ourselves up for success. So I always like to kick off with a question, and I want to think about this in sort of a more contextual way. What is the difference, sort of the main difference between being a leader and being a manager? I want to start there. I'm going to give everybody a moment to start typing in the chat. Differences between being a leader and a manager. I love what I'm seeing. So number one, a leader, there's a sense of empowerment, creation of new leaders. Managers having a little bit more specific duties. I really like where we're going with this, Maurice. I love this. That Michael, there is a sense of influence from the leadership side. Managers focus on process, leaders focus on motivation. I kind of like that. That's a really cool thing. Leaders influence, managers direct, leaders mentor. They might not always have the staff under that. Candace, I really like the way you said this, because leadership does not require a position. And so what we're going to spend some time with is how we can use our leadership characteristics in the managerial role. And that's going to be where we see this. I love what I'm also seeing against managers are assuring that deliverables are achieved. Managers are focusing on tasks. Kelly, I like this. Leaders work with team to provide strategy. Managers focus day to day. Leaders focus on the bigger picture. I really like where we're going with this as a whole. So I guess here's my question for you. What's the hardest part about being either a leader or a manager in your day to day or in your overarching role? That's the next question I have for you all. It's the hardest part about being a leader or manager. How to tell if what I'm doing is working. That's a really key question, right? Motivating ones that might not be wanting to be motivated. The leader side of things, right? The people leader side of things can be a little hard. Complete team engagement. I will tell you, we're going to be having a webinar coming up on mastering meaningful engagement, and we're going to be diving into that. I really like navigating the people portion. I also like what I'm hearing is getting spread too thin. You know, that there's this idea of getting spread too thin with all of the responsibilities coming into play. Accountability. Navigating a little bit of an age gap with that can occur, right? Because different motivations. And Bronca, I really like where we're going with this, ensuring promoting that motivation to different individuals. So in getting into today, there's going to be a lot of areas that I may end up covering because of your questions. And so, what I want to get into first is some of the ideas of sort of where leadership versus managers come into play. The first thing I always like to teach people is when it comes to leadership versus management, you manage the tasks, you lead people. And that's where a lot of you were right in that space and having that clear understanding of what comes into play. To really define the way from a generational workforce where this has come into play. The idea is that in the past, we have been driven by function from a managerial construct. This is geared around command, control, coordination, organization. It really is a task focused area. And then what happened is that how many of you noticed people leave? People are leaving. Yeah, team buy into the direction of the company. I think that that's really big. Is now what's happened is it's no longer about the function of the position, it's really more about the role. And that does, in Catherine's case, go into what she said is we need to really be okay with being not okay. And I like this because if we don't have an answer or if we don't necessarily have all of the answers, that's not the end of the world in being a leader. What being a leader is your ability to navigate the journey as it continues on in the growth and development of your people and the effectiveness of your process. As long as you're continuing to move in that direction, you're doing things right. And I feel like one of the key parts that hit us in leadership is one of the components that we call imposter syndrome. Anybody ever run into imposter syndrome? By show of hands, how many of you that's hit you one way or another? Yeah, I think that's such a huge piece. It does. And the fact is that half of leadership in the role we serve is we may feel like, and feel free that if I'm wrong on this, how many of you feel like I have to wear so many hats, I don't know which one is the right one to wear? This is where I hope that I can help out today. And that's ultimately where Smith, I love that. Needing a bigger closet, so many hats. Nicole, you're right. And that's such a huge piece is that we then internalize this pressure and pain within ourselves rather than really looking and going, this is part of the growth and leadership that comes with it. It is a pathway. It really is. And so, what I want to teach you is there are mainly, from Mintzberg's work, there are 10 major hats that you can wear. The way that I try to look at this is really identifying what's the leader you really want to be that you're most comfortable being in each of these areas. And then what's the area that you tell yourself, you know what? I need to practice this. I need to take a closer look and I need to make sure I spend more time in the practice and my growth in this area. And so I'll give an example starting with the interpersonal roles. There are times we really have to be the leader, where we really have to be the one motivating, guiding, providing the direction, really growing in that capacity. And for some, that's very, very easy to take it on by the reins and let's dive in. And for others, it may be harder because we may not be the most assertive in our cases. And so we have to really look and evaluate each one of these. So, what I'd like for us to do is we go through this. I want you to reflect on, man, from really a leadership from the definition of guiding the team towards a goal, motivating each individual. Is that something that I'm really genuinely comfortable with, or does that take practice for me? For me, I will tell you that's one area that I feel very strongly about that I do a very good case of. That's something I feel comfortable with. The next one, though, I don't know that I do as well as I could be. And I will tell you, I'm not a super, not that I genuinely value relationships. I really do. But I think for me, being the liaison is I'm normally not the person that is always asking you how your weekend is. And I'm not the person asking you, how always how you are. And I had to really practice and be more conscientious in my leadership capabilities to say, you know what? You need to really practice being the liaison a little bit more. And I had to really open myself up to that. The third one is in the space of the figurehead. And the figurehead is the person that when they need somebody to rely on to, you're there. You advocate, you got their back, you're there, you can lean into that. And that's something that I do very, very well. And so, Rhiannon, what I love that you're doing here is that pain point, right? Is understanding where your pain points are in each of these. We teach this course of evolving into the manager's role to where we really evaluate if we're struggling with one area, how do we navigate that and how do we practice that and what are some things that we work on? And so, in this case, for me, leader is easy peasy lemon squeezy. The liaison's where I have to spend a little bit more time. Hello, Ranji. And so in this case, what I want to make sure of is that you have a little bit of a grasp of, man, which one is natural to me and which one do I run into a little bit of pain points, just as Rhiannon did. The information roles. There are some people that are very, very, very good at monitoring information, at tracking the information, and using that data to make very good decisions. Once again, something I am very, very strong with. I know that I can naturally deliver that on a daily basis, no problem whatsoever. I am a very data driven mind and I value that. And then we get to dissemination. And dissemination is where you pass the information and communicate it quickly and effectively to the team. And so, if we're talking about that communication of information, I can disseminate information very quickly down to the team. What I don't always do as much as I wish I did, because I try to be conscientious about which hills to die on, that sometimes I need to be a little bit better of being a spokesperson for the group. Normally I try to handle it on my own. I may not communicate things up as much to other people, and I could be a little stronger in that area. And it's top down, it's bottom up, and it's across, Jason. So you're absolutely right there. The last piece that I want us to consider is where our strengths sit in the way we make decisions. And so decisions, I don't like to use the term hands-off leader, but I really am somebody that I run the team like I do a small business. I put the trust in the people to do the work they're going to do. And if something goes wrong, then we can have the dialogues about it. I'm not somebody to always step into things to do that. I really try to put trust. Once again, very easy for me to navigate that, no problem. I also am really good about negotiation. I'm really good about being able to focus on, hey, this is the area where we know we have to give a little bit to get a little. This is where we have to lean in a little bit more to make this happen. I'm very comfortable with that. The one I struggle with a little bit is the resource allocator, is really looking across the way and going, man, in our organization, am I really aware of everything in my capability? Am I really understanding every resource I have to drill down and create and build a better process with? And I got to be a little bit more focused in on that space. I think that's an area where I need growth. And then the disturbance handler, pretty good. Sometimes, I mean, I think I could even have a little practice there. It's like what happens when we're really running into issues? Can I be able to mediate and navigate that disturbance pretty easily? Wouldn't say easily, but I can do that decently. So I love the questions already coming in. This is what I'm looking for as we make this happen. What I want you to do for a moment is I'm going to come back to this slide in about 15 seconds. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at which ones you're very comfortable with, just as Yahira did, just as I believe Rhiannon did. Which ones are comfortable and which ones are a little bit more difficult for you? Which ones do you feel like I'm naturally good at doing this? This area I might not be as strong in. I'm going to give everybody a moment to take a look at these and see where do the struggles in leadership occur and where do the natural capabilities exist. What I love that I'm seeing is Dominic, in your case, you're mentioning that all three information roles are pretty good. So that communication up, down, across, sharing of information really strong. But maybe in the partnerships and the decision making, that's where, and or in the liaison, in the relational areas, that's where we might have to check in a little bit more and really see how people are doing. And that's okay. It's good for us to realize that. Edward, I like that the negotiator's a struggle. I love that. I love where we're opening this up now. This is awesome. Catherine, information interpersonal, maybe the decision making a little bit more on the challenge side. I like that. The figurehead, I really like this. Comfortable with information decision, interpersonal, a little bit of a challenge. That's fair. That's fair. First and third, second or less. I love what I'm seeing here. What I like that's going into play is that for each of these, I want to emphasize that you're not alone in this. And that was something I wanted to mention to a point that was mentioned earlier is you're not alone. You're not alone. As leader, this is why it's so hard to be in leadership because in the way that we look at it, if we're really good at one area and then we feel like we struggle in another, it's like, wow, am I really cut out for this? And the answer is 100% unequivocally yes. Yes, you are. It's just this is part of the growth in the leadership track that we have. And so it's really important to know where our successes are and where we come into play. I love whenever it's like, hey, liaison. I love the difference between Camille and Samantha. Samantha's like, hey, liaison is my sort of challenge, but I've been more intentional in this area to practice. Whereas Camille goes, that's my strength, but disturbance handling is where it comes into play. I want us to really look at this, and I just love this participation. So thank you all so much for this. This is so good. But I ask you this because if there's an area that you're running into, I will tell you that we have a solution that can help. We can be able to support. That's what we do. So if it's interpersonal roles, we have everything from emotional intelligence to building better work relationships to, um, mastering engagement, extending influence. If it's anything with information, we have anything from thinking with critical insight. We have business process improvement. We have all of those things that come into play. And then the decision making, we have things like negotiation and making decisions under pressure. And so just know that you don't have to go at this alone. And every single one of us are on our own journeys. Okay. So part of being a real successful leader is recognizing exactly where your strengths are to begin and where our areas of growth need to occur. And the moment you have that is the moment your journey can continue. And so I ask you this because when we talk about really trying to engage employees and really trying to make that a little bit different, what we really have to do is look for opportunities to really connect. And that can look different ways. So that leads me to another question that I want to go back to for you all is how do you all find ways to generate better engagement with the people that work for you? Because I saw that as a few concerns and questions as well. How do you currently try to find ways to motivate individuals to get them to engage? Yeah. Yeah, Maurice, we teach a course called Managing Remote and Virtual Teams. You are absolutely right. It is a challenge that you have to really look at the way that systems and processes get used in the way we motivate. You're absolutely right. Yeah. Catherine, I love this idea of recognition and asking how they like to be recognized. It might be private versus public. It may be that it's not even recognition, but it might be appreciation. And there's a difference between recognition and appreciation we're going to talk about in just a moment. Yeah, we have to look at the defining the next steps. I always like no sticks. Yeah, sticks today don't work nearly as much. I will tell you that. The market doesn't allow for it, Kenneth. I will say that. It just doesn't work. It really is a lot more carrots and what we call plant leadership. We teach that in another session. about plant leadership and trying to look at your individuals as plants in the way that we motivate and grow. Yeah, I think really asking them what matters to them, finding their WIFM is a really big thing. Does anybody know what WIFM is? WIIFM? Yeah, you got to find their what's in it for me. Brilliant job. Yeah, absolutely. And it is. It's sometimes really about knowing where it is that their personal values come into play, scheduling time. And Candace, that's where this is a huge piece that you mentioned is if it needs to be business focused, then let it be business focused. If it needs to be personally focused for a little bit, then let it do that too. And I will tell you that for me personally, I'm a little bit more of what they call a cactus. I'm somebody that I like business. I like straightforward. I don't get into the how the weekends were. So for me, I used to have a manager that would schedule a weekly one-on-one with me. And I would be so upset about it because I just felt like that was an hour of my time that now I'm losing. Whereas my manager viewed it as an opportunity for us to connect more. And it really had to be a lot of give and take in the understanding of each other. So I really like the way we look at the individual in the way we connect. I will tell you that I don't have one on ones regularly. What I do is look at the individual to see how often and what the focus of the one on ones are. Some are every 2 weeks. I have one that's weekly. The other one, I check in, and it's just more of a check in of, hey, we're due for a catch up. We haven't spoken a little bit. I just want to see how you're doing. I really love these strategies you're bringing in. I'm going to teach you ways that you can up the ante as you go. So, in the generation of engagement, yeah, I think that's a huge thing. Let them decide, let them have a little bit more dictation. Bernice, what I would say is as long as the effectiveness of the work is coming out and the outputs are what you're rooting for, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we don't also want to drown our people either. We have to really look at the individual and what their true values are. So, here's ways that we can up the ante. The most short term way to motivate employees, and I'm going to go to S to L, right? Short term versus long term. Short term is reward. It is the carrots. It is the way to provide the incentives that have them cross the finish line on things. I do like these as short term approaches, especially whenever there are crunch time deadlines, heavy deadlines we got to get to quicker. That rewards are going to be good. But rewards don't last. They don't last as much. So then what we have to get into is value them. And value looks like one of two different things. Value can look like recognition, value can look like appreciation. And so I want to differentiate between the two. Recognition, what's the difference between recognition and appreciation? Well, recognition is where you focus on what specifically they did to achieve the objective. And some people are more task focused, nuts and bolts. They value the recognition and they will actually get uncomfortable with the other one, which we're going to get in the other way. The other one is appreciation. And you don't recognize the task. You focus on the appreciation of the quality of the characteristic that was exhibited. So I'm going to give you a difference between the two. Who are my nuts and bolts folks? My nuts and bolts, just the GSD people, get stuff done, not overly personal. Let's get to the straight business side of things. I love this. So with like Rhiannon, that this is perfect. For you 6, 7, 8 that I'm seeing come in, with recognition, I would walk in and be like, Shelby, you crushed this project from start to finish. You really nailed every piece of this. I can't tell you how much this is going to drive better business, drive focus. You really made a key impact here. Great work. Absolutely great work here. It was a phenomenal job. That is going to be a recognition piece. appreciation. Who are my, I don't want to use the term feelers, but who are my ones that like they value the people side of things and the feelings side of things, the journey side of things. Excellent. Absolutely, Rhiannon. And that's for me, is like that works for me. That'll keep me motivated. I'm more of a recognition than appreciation person. But I have people on my team that really are more very people oriented. And I'm going to show you the difference to where recognition is going to be different. Appreciation is, you know what, Casey? I just love that how diligent you are in everything you do. Maya, I just love that no anytime there's a question, you just always seem to make sure that you look deeper for an answer. And I just really love the way you critically think through things. And I just think that's a characteristic that really stands out. I appreciate that. I mean that. That's going to be the appreciation side of things. The appreciation is a characteristic or a quality. The recognition is a task. And Shannon, you're right that we can have a little bit of both, but we also have to recognize that some people might want one and not another. For some, appreciation can make people uncomfortable. In others, recognition may not be enough. So, what we really have to look at is what it is that people value. We have to look for what people value. And Rhiannon, we have to really mean it. And there's ways we can give feedback when we're delegating things. We're going to talk about, well, we can talk about that if that's a question a little bit later. We'll ask on that. But if you can get to the value stage, then the next piece is respect. And respect transcends the job. Maurice, we are going to dive into that. Yep. We're going to talk about the difference between pop feedback and CSS feedback. We'll talk about that. I'll answer that question in a little bit. So, respect is the most long-term thing it can be, to where you can take a person on your team and say, you know what? I trust that you got this. I respect the work you do. I think you can run with this ball. I believe in it. I think you got it. I think you can nail it. I respect it. That's where real motivation comes in, because now there's a real element of trust, and trust lasts long term. Direction. Short term, set the expectations. We have to make sure that expectations are clear, that they are understood, that there's buy-in from everybody. We have to make sure that we're all on the same page to start. That's a bare minimum short-term effect. What we also have to do is make sure that we're providing the direction, not by just saying, here's what you do and here's how you do it, but allowing that providing to be a level of questioning that comes into play too. Allowing that room to say, here's what I see in this. What do you see and how can I help provide it? Long term, giving people the autonomy in the space while still knowing that you're there still as a line of support, that you still have the safety net just in case. I called this in this space, this level of support, succeed or learn mentality. I want to make sure that I let them drive, right? I think you have to look, Maurice, this is a great question. I'm going to answer this one a little bit quickly. Can you let a person know that you're depending on them and come through? You have to look at the individual in this case. There are some people, for me, for a person like me, absolutely I would lean into that. 1,000,000%, I would lock in and dive in. Other people, though, they may not be amazing under that pressure, and it may cause them to create even more pain and angst. So we have to really kind of look at that. Denise, I like this. Anything they'd like to share? What are they working on? What do they need help with? Absolutely. That's the expectation, the provision, support. Huge. That's a way for direction to go. Development, short term coaching. That's your one-on-ones, coaching them through process, coaching them through approach. Coaching is that one side of it. The next piece, though, is getting them real training. And real training is getting them to the space where they learn new skills on a deeper level that they can then apply on a larger scale. And the most important thing you can do is education. And I say there's a huge difference between training and education. Long-term education means that there is buy-in for the individual to want to dive into it. That's the education. Education is much more of a facilitative dialogue than it is just a training. Think of training as the great Montel Jordan. This is how we do it, right? Here's your 1, 2, and 3. Here's how you walk through this. Education is more Backstreet Boys. Tell me why you think this really matters in the grand scheme of things. Tell me why it ain't nothing but a heartache, right? No, there it is. So in this case, tell me why this really means something in the grand scheme of things. Tell me why this means something in the big picture. Education requires buy-in. That's where you get that. That's longer term. For care, the S is feedback. We're going to dive into that in just a few moments here. But if you want to go further, really listen to their feedback. Listen to their pain points. Listen to their challenges. Listen to what's really bothering them. If they're venting, let them vent. Let them get that out. Not all the time, but allow them to really understand that they are heard, understood, and valued. And I always say, if you go one time long term, I always say everybody on my team gets one hill to die on. They get one hill. You pick one hill, I will go to the top of the mountain with you and I will die on that hill with you if it really means something. But you get one. You don't get 4. You don't get 8. You get one. So make sure it really counts when it comes down to it. So what I want to do, that's the first half of just learning some cool things, learning ways you can up the game, learn about the roles, learn about yourself. What I want to do now is I want to move to some Q&A. And I want to spend the second half of this really understanding your pain points and understanding where this comes in. And I want to make sure I'm leaving enough time for as many people as possible to ask the questions they need to. So, Mariella, kick us off and tell me what questions you're seeing. I know there was a few that came through the chat, and I want to make sure that I can answer these appropriately.
Absolutely, Jay. We had a couple come in. For leaders, what if you are good when you understand and align with goal and not so good when the goal is provided top down without middle management input, etc., and you were told to lead with no info in the in
Yeah.
between?
Yeah. The challenge with this, and this is a great question. I think it was Tatiana's question was um, whenever things are being barked downward, it never creates something that, once again, one of the key words we talked about was buy in. The reason why that's a challenge is because you don't have the buy in for it. So, what I always try to say is I try to help coach upward. And if I ever have a boss or a leader that says, you know, this needs to be done, and we just have to make sure that this is huge. And if we can't get this done, then we're going to be running into larger problems. One of the first things that I try to ask them is, how can I help sell that message? How can I help sell that message? Because I got to believe in that myself, and they're not going to buy in for me if I can't find a way to sell it. So, how can I be able to help sell this message so that we can really get this mission where we need to? And so what you're doing with this is you're relying a little bit on the leader, on your boss to have some accountability in this too, to say, well, that's just what the top wanted. No, no, no. We got to make sure if we just say it's coming from the top, they're not going to buy into it. How do we really get them to buy into it? I think we really have to look for a message here. So I try to make sure that we leave that dialogue with a message that we can get buy-in for, that even ourselves we can believe in it.
Fantastic. Excellent. Love a little bit of clarification. We had another question come in from our Q&A. How do you get managers above you to assess themselves around the various leadership roles and actually work on them?
Oh, say that one more time, Mariella, just so that I can understand it.
Absolutely. How do you get managers above you to assess themselves around the various leadership roles and actually work on them?
Throw me under the bus. You're not, hey, I attended this session. It was really cool. I got to learn a lot about myself. It talked about the 10 ways that you're, that you're a leader, and it really has us evaluate each one. You know, I think it's pretty cool. I'd love for like it would be cool if we checked this out together and kind of saw this. It'd be neat to see how we can help each other. I use a lot of we language and then throw me under the bus for the training side of it.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much to our audience, by the way. This is awesome info to
Yeah,
have and great, great questions. So keep them
absolutely.
coming. We had another couple. How do you handle a team if there are roadblocks thrown up by team members that cause issues in the decision roles?
Great question. I think this was Rhiannon's question from earlier, and I really like this question because it's almost like what happens when we're getting in our own way, right? What I typically try to do is have them start looking for the solution. And I mean this to where when we're talking about, hey, well, we can't do that because of this, and no, we can't do that because of this. Okay. If I got hit by a bus tomorrow, and I'm more of the skeptical side, not the optimistic side, but if you wanted to say, if I hit the lottery tomorrow and I wasn't here, how would you approach this? How would you tackle this? If this was where we were moving forward, how would you take this on? What would be some things you would try? And I try to put the question, what we call that, Rhiannon, is metacognition. I will ask them questions to get them to think about the way they're thinking. And I'm not doing that just so that they do it. I'm doing it so that they really can actually take a little bit of ownership in the process as well. I find that if I just tell people something that they need to get done, I'll get compliance at best. But if I ask them the way it looks like to them and the way that they can reshape it, I'll get more commitment to it. These are great questions. I'm loving this.
Absolutely. And yeah, Rhiannon actually also threw in the chat, how do you handle that when you get no response?
So I think what we might have to do is define what no response means. Are we allowing enough room for silence in the dialogue? Are we allowing enough? And I say this because most people, they might need a little bit of time to process the answer, or if they don't, they're going to have to tell you with silence. Somebody's going to have to give you something. They're not going to just sit there and just say this the whole time. So what I try to do is connect to each individual. And in the one-on-ones, I would really lean into them on one-on-one and saying, if you were doing this, how would you approach it? How would you tackle this yourself? And don't give them the out by taking the answer off their plate. Allow the silence. Allow them to have to come up. And if they go, I don't know, excellent. Let's start looking at what things we can do. What do you currently know? And what I like to do is really lead them with questions rather than tell them what to do. That's a huge difference in this case. Yep, absolutely.
Awesome insight. Perfect. We had another couple come in. How do you get help? How do you actually, hold on, let me reframe this. How do you help get a team that has lost their momentum? I'm assuming, yeah, it's just a team that's lost their momentum. I've worked with four other supervisors as my peers managing a team of 16, but it's very hard to keep all four supervisors aligned and it harms our team dynamics.
Yeah, I think you have to take your moments to team build, and I think you have to take your moments to revisit their VIPs. We talk about VIPs in another strategy, but I think it's getting back to those places of number one, really understanding what each one of us value, what our interests are, and what our preferences are, and redefining that as a good re-collaboration. And then the second thing is what we call this, or you've ever heard the story of forming, storming, norming, and performing. What happens is you'll be in a state of performing, and then it'll start to go stagnant. You have to reform the identity of the team as it continues to move. So sometimes that means sitting down with those four supervisors and saying, hey, changes occurred. We've seen some shifts in our organization. I think we need to take a moment to come back to this and redefine what our team identity is and the way we're moving now. You know, we used to be instructors, now we're facilitators. We used to be a business analysis business, and that's where a majority of our business was focused. Now we really have grown into a true leadership business as well. And so it's like, how do you redefine your identity? You have to take that moment to recalibrate and sit down with your team and reconnect.
Absolutely. Yes, realigning is essential. All right, we have a couple more coming in. For leaders, how do you define great? To clarify by great, I mean that you as a leader are doing a great job. It is so difficult to juggle all of the things necessary. So, how can I ensure that I am staying at my potential level?
It's a great question. It's almost like, what advice do you have to try to make sure you're being a great leader without sending yourself over the edge? I think great leaders are confident, but I think confidence is the reality that perfection doesn't exist. And I think what I'm trying to get behind that is saying that if you genuinely believe you're doing a good job and you're looking at it almost like a video game level of, how am I taking this to the next level? What's the next thing I'm doing to take this to the next level? That is a true sign of great leadership. And I'll tell you this, I mean, I've been in leadership for a decade now. I am somebody that I lead leadership for Pete's sake, but I still have this philosophy that if you're the smartest person in the room, go find the next room. And for me, that's what really gives me confidence in the ability to lead, is knowing, look, this is really where my strengths are. This is where my voice is. This is where I feel like I'm really nailing things. But I really want to make sure that, it doesn't end here, that it's an area of growth, and give yourself that grace that, what, you're never going to be the perfect leader, but great does not mean perfect. Great means that you're growing and you're finding the next level.
New levels to explore every day. Awesome stuff. Alrighty, we have a boss that always says, let me know if you have any questions or need any info. Yet 90% of the time, when I ask for help, the boss says they are busy or not available. It reduces their credibility as it doesn't really show that they care. How do I work around this without being bitter? Great
Mm.
question.
Woo! Grace. Number one, grace is a key thing. However, it doesn't solve all the problems. What I will say is that if somebody is having a little bit of difficulty managing their time, what I really try to do is start setting up a true frequent one-on-one. And what I will do is, if I can't get a hold of them, or I can't get a hold, I will really actually try to, I hate to do this, but do some recon and look for, when do they seem to be the most available. I had a boss that always, I did have one boss in the past that this was this way, that they were locked up in their office. They were busy, but I always noticed around after lunchtime that they would get out of the office, stretch the legs, check in, and do some things like that. So what I started making a request for was saying, look, I at least want to get something on the books. And if we don't hold to it, fine. But if we have an agenda for it, I want to make sure it's held. Could we have a 20-minute touch base at 2 o'clock every Wednesday, just to make sure that we're moving in the right direction? And I use a lot of we language in this case because I want to make sure that it's not just them not being available, but it's really us working towards a plan that's effective.
Excellent. Alrighty, have another one here. As a new manager, how do I build trust from employees if I always have to confirm the answers to their questions? Since this is the first time I am dealing with these situations, I have an employee that always tells me, so and so didn't respond to my email. And when I ask, did you try sending a Teams? The answer is usually, no, I'll try that. How can I inspire them to think of this on their own? A little direction.
Yeah, I think in this case, this is a great question. Normally, what I try to do is, sometimes people can't see the forest through the trees. And so, because of that, I help them to build a process. So, I always try to teach them and create a little workflow for them, whether it's a little video workflow or in a Word doc or something like that. But create, like, if your mode of communication is email, if after 24 hours we don't receive that, send Teams message. If 4 hours after that, if that's not received, make phone call. But get them something for that they can print out and have directly in front of them. Number one is they need to understand the process. And number two, they need to see the process in front of them routinely. So I really try to make sure that I'm not just giving them an answer and saying, like, no, did you just send this or did you do that? Guide them back to a process or a framework. Did we follow the process or framework? If we didn't, then you know what your next steps are. Go take the next step then. Where are you in step one versus step two versus step three? So I really try to make sure of this being the case. And I make sure that they put a timeline with it because then that'll hold them a little bit more accountable to it.
Always nice to refer to a process. Awesome. Alrighty. We have another couple coming in. How can a leader effectively manage difficult managers who have advanced through the ranks, particularly those who may struggle with adapting their leadership style, resist feedback, or have a strong sense of entitlement due to their tenure?
Yeah, this is a really key point. What I really try to do is this is where I'm telling you that we language is probably one of the most powerful things you can do. I think, and I will tell you that we have a very tenured organization where we are, and I will say that sometimes there are some people that are very comfortable in their ways of the way things have been. And when that happens, what I really try to remind them of is the greater we, the greater us, the greater mission, and really focus in when we have that we dialogue of saying, I completely understand why this is important to your process. I acknowledge, I do take the moment to acknowledge, but then I shift them into we language. And what that looks like is I can see why this is important to what you're doing on an operational construct, or I see why this is important in what you're doing from a marketing construct. I can see why what you're doing is important from a project management kind of component. I also want us to make, and I go to not but, you're not allowed to use the word but. I go to, I also think that there's room across this whole spectrum to where we have to make sure all the wheels are moving in the right direction. And I know how important that is to you too. So we have to look at a way where we can be able to make these adaptations and happen. How do we do that? And you have to keep with we language. It can't seem accusatory. It can't seem in any way. But it has to be something to where you're guiding them to the greater we.
Fantastic. Alrighty. How do you bring senior level management to understand frustrations at the director level without sounding whiny, making excuses, or giving up the ghost here? My direct reports are very frustrated with chronic late deliverables that cause my staff to work late most times. Oh no.
I think this is a great piece here to where this is where normally the sit down with your senior comes into play and saying, hey, I just try to remind higher leaders of the cost that goes into replacing an employee. And if I have a team that's saying, hey, I think you know this team's willing to go to the end of the earth for you, I think that's really important. What I want to make sure we're reducing is burnout because burnout's one of the most expensive things as a company, as you know. So I think if we can build in, we again can build in a process that allows them to be a little bit more ahead of the game, what's something we can create that allows them to maybe not have to work late all the time in this case so we can really focus on boundaries and we can really make sure that they're working with this. So it really is about what we call, Bernice, we teach a class called thinking with critical insight, and one of the things we look at is we can't just be consistently putting out fires. We really have to look at ways to be Smokey the Bear and build a process that's going to be more effective. And we have to sit down with our senior management, come with a solution, but be ready for that solution to be challenged so that you can then work to something well.
Excellent follow up. Perfect. And it looks like this will be our final question, unless we have a couple last minute ones in the chat. How do you fix a work relationship with upper management once you've had to whistleblow on them? How do you
Mm.
move forward once all trust and respect is gone?
Yeah, that's going to require a lot more mediation, to be honest with you. I'd love to provide a very easy answer to that and say it's all going to be better and it's but at this point there has to be probably a third party mediator in play. There has to be a true working construct in this case. Normally, once the whistleblow has occurred, there has to be a shift in that organization, one way or another, most times. Otherwise, you're going to go through more intense mediation to have to work through it. It's like at this point, it's now marriage counseling is where this comes into play. So I'd love to have an easier answer on that, but I also like to be very realistic in those cases. That normally now at this point, you're at a space of mediation with a third party to get back to that space of trust.
All right, and we had one more come in. How do you help an employee understand that working more isn't always better? They don't have unlimited time to get the job done. Great question.
Great question indeed. And I saw that come in from Casey. And Casey, what I always try to remind them of, there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. And in this case, what I really try to push for is efficiency, which is, I always say that if we're moving up the ranks, right? I always say that good employees look at the way that they can get the job done effectively. That's what good employees do. I always say the best employees not only get the job done effectively, but they look for ways to increase efficiency. They move efficiently through the process as well. So, what your goal is to kind of work with them on or communicate with them on is, I think you're doing a great job from an effective standpoint. But what we really need to be looking at is, how do we do that in a more efficient standpoint? How do we really make sure that that happens?
Alrighty. Ooh, and one more just came in. How do you handle a team member that pushes back when you give a direction that is in their job class?
I think one of the key things that we might have to do a little bit more in leadership as a whole is, we have to find their why. Even if it sounds ridiculous, even if it sounds like, wow, that's like ridiculous of an answer, what we really have to spend more time doing is not just getting the moment of getting it, we have to spend more time getting them, because people will not move if they don't think you're in the same arena that they are. So if somebody is told that, hey, there's a direction that this has to be taken care of and we need to get this done, that's not a demonstration. You get it, but we have to make sure that we're taking that extra leap to get them and understand, why is that a pushback on their end? From their lens, why is that a pain point? From their viewpoint, why is that a challenge in there? What seems to be the pain point from their lens? And so it's really about taking that extra moment to get them. That's a big piece. And I say this because a younger generation right now is in the WIFM market. And the reason why is because the market allows it to be the case. 20 years ago, if people weren't happy with their job, the likelihood of getting another job quickly was not as likely. Now you look, and there's Indeed, LinkedIn, recruiters, there's all kinds of things that if people aren't happy, they can find another position elsewhere.
Everything moves a lot quicker nowadays. 100%. Alrighty. And then I believe we got another one come in. How do you manage people who are doing micromanagement?
I always try to remind them of, in the micromanagement, I don't think most people realize they're micromanaging. I think they view it as they're being diligent in their process. So what I try to remind them of in the micromanagement is, I'd like to have fewer check-ins. And I try to make sure of, when we're trying to make sure everything's right in the process, I know how important it is to you. I want to find a way to where we don't have to communicate all of the time about it, because it's actually creating even more hindrance in the work. What I'd like to see is, how do we create a meeting? How do we create a meeting to where we can check in with each other to see how things are going without having to go through every line of the process? So once again, I try to focus on more of a space of checking in and not checking up. There's a key difference between checking in and checking up. Checking in is your ability to see how people are doing. Checking up is, what are you doing? And it's okay to mention and say, hey, I think we might need a little bit more time in the how are we doing than in the what are we doing. I know the what are we doing is important, but we need to make sure that we're looking at how we're doing as well and making sure we're okay with this. And that doesn't mean more. Folks, one of the key things I've ever learned in leadership is, more is not better. Better is better. So more meetings does not create more better results. More checkups does not create better results. Better is better.
Fantastic. All righty. Well, that will be our last question for the session and right on time, just to be mindful of everyone's schedule today. I wanted to take a second to thank our amazing audience for these great questions. And thank you, Dr. J, for your amazing insight.
Thank you all. I really appreciate that. That is excellent. I really like that.
Amazing insight from everyone here in the chat. So hopefully we were able to address some of your concerns and your questions. And I went ahead and dropped a quick link. If you want to visit us at Watermark Learning or click on that link I dropped in the chat, you can go ahead and check out all of our info on evolving into the management role. And again, if you missed out on any part of this session, we will absolutely be following up with an email after the webinar. So be on the lookout for that. Alrighty. Thank you so much, audience. And thanks again, Jay.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.